Can you just tell us who you are and where you are?
I'm Diann Wingert. I am a former licensed psychotherapist and serial business owner who decided to combine my passions of business and working with folks with ADHD in 2017. I now exclusively coach entrepreneurial folks with ADHD traits. I'm also the host of the ADHD-ish podcast. You are seeing me today from my home near Palm Springs, California.
That all sounds really good. I'm just really curious, what businesses did you have before? What were some of your serial businesses?
Oh, goodness. I've owned two businesses with a previous husband and my current husband. One of them was a private security firm where we did locksmithing, installing safes, security systems. I was at that time, this is when combining with having my young kids. So I was working from home, raising my kids, and working with my then husband to run this business. It was my idea. I named the company, designed the logo, taught myself how to become a bookkeeper, and literally just said, we're starting a business. All he had to do was go out and service the customers, and I did everything else. I found that I enjoyed it. I kept on going. I've started businesses with a couple of my kids, and my current husband, I'm very versatile.
You were already a psychotherapist before the locksmith.
Well, yeah, that kind of happened along the way. I wanted to be a journalist or a broadcaster. And I ended up getting talked out of that by a guidance counselor who gave me terrible guidance. I think I would have really done well in that. I ended up going into medical sales. While I was in my medical sales career, my oldest child, my older son, was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 8 because I didn't know anything about it. In true ADHD fashion, I dove headfirst into the topic. I learned so much that I thought, gee, you're halfway to becoming a psychotherapist. You might as well go the rest of the way. I left my job. I applied to UCLA graduate school for social work. I went through the program. As part of my practicum, I was working with a bunch of little boys with ADHD. This was the early 90s in a social skills group. Every time I ran the group with another person who was neurotypical, a fellow intern, I would walk these kids out to the waiting room and wait for their parents to pick them up. Because it was an evening group, most of the parents who came to pick them up were dads. Well, I just started noticing how many of these dads seemed to be the grown-up version of their little boys. At that time, only little boys were being diagnosed, and the teaching was it's outgrown by adolescence or early adulthood. Everybody in the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA told me that over and over. And I said, listen, I know I'm just a lowly grad student, but I think you're wrong. I don't think they outgrow it. That's what I want to do my thesis on. I did. I came to the conclusion that this is a lifelong condition. My degree was awarded. I went on with my career. And now I think, damn it, I could have been the grandmother of adult ADHD, but I got distracted.
At what point along the way, you were diagnosed late in life?
I sure was.
What was the inspiration for your diagnosis?
It was only 8 years ago, believe it or not. I have a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD, and I identify with many of these traits myself. I didn't get diagnosed until after my daughter, who is gifted in ADHD, as I am also gifted in ADHD, she was diagnosed in grad school herself. I strongly suspect my second son, who's in his 30s and is now finally saying, Mom, I think you're right. I think I am too. I didn't get diagnosed until well into my adult life because I had always been relatively successful. It wasn't until I had closed my psychotherapy practice, I had pivoted into coaching, I had started working from home online, that I finally came to the full extent of my abilities to maintain structure and systems on my own. That was when I finally said, okay, I've had a good run, but now I give in.
Looking back, knowing what you know, looking back to yourself as a little girl, do you see that there were signs then that you had this?
Of course. In fact, when I finally did get diagnosed, I had two different types of reactions. Some people said, obviously, like, for real, you're seriously the last to know. And I'm like, gee, thanks. Then the others said, you are not. No way. This is not uncommon for girls. My hyperactivity and my impulsivity as a girl manifested in I was just so eager to learn. I always sat in the front row in the middle seat. This was partly because I wanted to be as close to the action as possible, which I've had my entire life. And also because I have really bad vision and I was not about to wear those little ugly cat eye glasses that the doctor gave me. I'm literally sitting in the front row. But the teacher would ask a question, and as soon as I knew what question she was forming, my arm was shooting up in the air. At first, I guess they thought, oh, isn't that cute? She's so eager. It just kept going up and going up. And I remember, I will never forget this. I think it was in second grade. My teacher walks over to me, puts her arm on my shoulder and pushes down and says, I know you have the answer, Diann. Why don't you give somebody else a chance? The message I got was, you're too eager. You're drawing attention to yourself. You're being obnoxious and you need to shut up.
Mm.
That began a long career of attempting to mask and hide.
Oh my gosh. How old were you then?
I was probably about 7.
7 or
Maybe.
8?
Yeah.
So did you feel like you were different from the other girls in the class? Did you have that feeling?
This is something I talk about all the time with my clients. You've always known you were different. You just didn't know what to call it. You went through a variety of attributional theories over the years. You thought you were dumb. You thought you were disinterested. You thought you didn't try hard enough. You thought all these things. And little by little, because you kept searching and you didn't give up, you eventually stumbled across the information. I think that's how most women figure it out. They figure it out on their own over many years of struggling and often accumulating other mental health conditions along the way. I always knew I was different. I thought different is not good. I still think that's the message for most people. Different is not good, even if it's exceptional. Yeah. You're not behaving like you're expected to. So you need to curb your enthusiasm and conform to the norm. I really tried hard to do that, but I always felt like I was pulling one over on people. I used to brag about to myself. I used to call it passing for normal. I thought that meant I was winning. What I didn't realize was that I was becoming a stranger to myself in many ways.
What was the experience like? You're clearly super smart. To be that smart and eager to learn and have ADHD, did you feel like something was holding you back? Yes, you were masking to meet other people's expectations, but did you also feel like you had difficulties processing things at some point?
I treat boredom like a life-threatening condition. I know that's traumatic, but if I'm interested in something, I'm obsessed. If I'm not obsessed and interested, then I probably couldn't care less. It's always been hard for me to pretend I'm interested in something that I don't find interesting. I've always felt a lot of self-consciousness and even shame that things I think I should be interested in, I'm like, not so much. Whereas I could get wildly obsessed about something that's just completely idiotic and unimportant. But for me, I've always felt like, yeah, there's something different about you. And yet I always knew I was really smart. I knew that I got good grades, but then I did other things that didn't make sense. I did a bit of shoplifting when I was a little kid. I actually started a fire once and blamed it on one of my siblings.
What about? Was that just like novelty, like stimulation?
Yeah. I have learned that I am combined type, which should be quite apparent. I'm not inattentive. I have both. But I'll tell you something, my daughter, who is inattentive, distractible, subtype, and gifted, said something to me. We were having a Zoom call like this, as we do. I was regaling her with some story about some fantastic thing I did. And she just stopped and said, Mom, I think you're having a lot more fun with ADHD than I am. She says, because you just blurt things out. You just do things. A lot of things don't work out well for you. I'm on my third marriage, for example. She said, but you take so many more risks, you take so many more actions, and you're not so burdened with overthinking that I think you've just learned how to shrug things off and keep going. Meanwhile, I'm overthinking and trying to get it right. Sometimes that means the opportunity to act is just passing me by. And I said, man, that right really tells the story about the different subtypes and why things are so difficult.
Because
Yes.
you own it. You've made it into a business now, and which is the opposite of being scared to tell your employer or your teacher. I'm sure a lot of women would see that society sees it as like such a terrible thing, a disorder, an illness, right?
I do think ultimately I have turned it into my unfair advantage, but
Why would it be unfair?
I'm just being snarky. I've turned it into a business. I've turned it into a way of inspiring other people who want to reach the point where they embody what I call radical self-acceptance. But it took me a lot of years, a lot of mistakes, a lot of hardcore regrets, including not even knowing I had ADHD before I passed it on to all three of my kids from two different marriages. I've got all three subtypes in my family. Those are some powerful ADHD genes. Would I have had kids had I known? I've had people ask me that.
Oh,
Absolutely. But I've always been a seeker. I've always been interested in understanding myself and others better. It's just that we're just decades behind when it comes to women and girls. What I typically say is, you don't find what you're not looking for. There are generations upon generations of women who don't know and won't know unless enough of those of us who do know make it possible for them. They're just going to be what a little boy is making all manner of ruckus in school. He can't stay in his seat. He can't keep his hands to himself. He can't keep his mouth shut. He won't wait his turn. That's a behavior problem, and everyone takes it seriously. But an inattentive, distractible little girl who's doodling on a piece of paper and staring out the window and having fanciful dreams in her head, quietly underachieving, she is not a problem. So
no.
she's not going to get noticed.
In the meantime, she's accumulating all these comorbid issues, anxiety, depression, right?
Absolutely.
Was that an issue for you? Do you think that it took a toll all those years undiagnosed?
Absolutely. People who meet me now say, wow, you really make ADHD look fun. I wish I had it. This is the accumulation of a lot. I am a therapist. I've had lots of therapy. I also have a big trauma background, so I've had to deal with all of that. I did have things that held me back. The most important one is that I believed there was something fundamentally wrong with me.
Right.
Even though I had these gifts and these traits, I also have a terrible memory.
Mm-hmm.
I'm naturally
Socially, it can be a handicap, right? Because if you have
yeah.
a bad memory and you get bored easily,
Yes.
90% of personal relations, I think, is small talk. I get very impatient with that, and I can't help but show it sometimes.
I can do the small talk,
Yeah,
but I need it to go somewhere pretty
yeah.
quickly. I need it to go somewhere deeper. When it doesn't, I might act up or just might wander off. It's like not being able to trust myself. That to me is one of the most insidious tolls that undiagnosed ADHD takes in a woman. You know you're different. You're not exactly sure why, but you're pretty sure it's not a good thing. Even though you and others may be able to point to some really incredible attributes that you have, you are never far from thinking, yeah, but what about the other things? So
Mhm.
that tends to be your default. Self-conscious, insecure, worried that even when people seem to tolerate me, maybe they don't really like me. I can be around the group, but I don't really fit the way others seem to fit. That sense of true, genuine belonging isn't there. Not being able to remember things like people's names. I've had people tell me, don't you remember when this happened and you said this and you did that? They're literally reading chapter and verse. Not only do I not know what they're talking about, I am absolutely certain they're not talking about me. I was never there. Even my brain is just not, it's feeling like I can't be trusted. I can't be counted upon. I don't know for sure that what I can do today that I'll be able to do tomorrow or even want to try. How do I plan? How do I predict? How do I make promises to anybody and believe I'm actually going to follow through on them? All of that takes a toll, big
You do
time.
express it really well. That's some of the core of just the hardness of this, isn't it? I'm really curious about your clients. What kind of people are you seeing?
I rebranded the podcast from the Driven Woman Entrepreneur to ADHD-ish. I did that for a couple of very specific reasons. I had reached a point where even though I'm naturally qualified and skilled to work with women who have ADHD and are entrepreneurial, I realized I also want to work with men. I have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and I really enjoy working with all genders. I like working with people at different stages of business who have different specific challenges to their ADHD. I took my photo off the cover because I didn't want somebody to think, oh, no, one more white lady talking about ADHD. I just made the language more expansive and more general. I'm happy to say I have clients all over the US, Canada, Western Europe.
My goodness.
I have men, I have women, I have a trans client, I have non-binary, and at all different types of and stages of business. But here's what they have in common. All of them identify with ADHD. About half of them are gifted as well. I do a screening because I feel like I'm not for everybody. I have a very strong personality. I am very direct. And people who have really problems with rejection sensitivity and maybe they had a narcissistic mother, I'm going to be traumatizing to them. I have to screen them out. But if I start to think this person may also be gifted, just based on how they're telling their story, the things that they're pointing out, the experiences they've had, the struggles they have, and I'll ask them, were you by any chance in a gifted program in school? Some will say, oh, I was homeschooled, so we didn't have that. Or I was educated in another country and we didn't have that. Or, yeah, I used to be gifted. Do you know how many women will say, I used to be gifted? Yeah. Girlfriend, I got news for you. Just like ADHD, one does not outgrow this. But they no longer believe it's true because they're focusing on all their problems and not on their strengths.
Cynthia and I were both wondering if maybe because you have the combined type, you also have this hyperactive energy that, yes, that makes it into more of a gift. There's the continuing conversation, is ADHD a gift or a curse? I think it's like a manageable gift, sometimes not. But how do you think it's been a gift in your life?
That's a hard question. I was at a conference one time and they were doing a experiential exercise with everyone in the room. We all had ADHD and it was a red pill, blue pill kind of thing. Would you, if you could, not have ADHD anymore, and why? And it led to some very interesting conversations. I'm a trauma survivor. I have become an incredibly resilient person. I absolutely credit the combination of being gifted and combined type ADHD for that.
Why?
Because I believe what may have crushed someone else, for me, it became the impetus for post-traumatic growth. I can't sit still. And it's not like I physically can't sit still. I'm sitting still right now. I can't stay in the same place. I need to have a sense of movement. I need to have a sense of progress, a sense of momentum. When that's not available to me through my circumstances, I am compelled to create it. I think being wired that way, yes, that's definitely related to being hyperactive. I need to be doing stuff. I need to be working on stuff. I'm probably never going to retire. I always need to be thinking about things, doing things, trying new things, creating new things. I do think that part of it is a gift. But when you are a person who has had probably more like really good ideas that you've done absolutely nothing with than most people could ever even imagine, that too has a cumulative toll. You begin to realize I have wasted more potential than most people could ever dream of having.
Hmm.
You get to a certain stage of your life where it's, man, I better get my you know what together, or it's going to be game over. I'm going to feel like I had a lot of laughs, I created a lot of noise, but what did I actually accomplish in this life?
Don't
Well,
you feel a great sense of accomplishment and a ton of stuff? You're talking about some of your clients, right?
no, I'm also talking about me, because here's something a lot of people maybe don't understand. We are driven, the more hyperactive among us are driven to close the gap between where we are and where we could be.
Hmm.
We live in the realm of possibility.
Hmm.
We're always imagining how things could be better, faster, different, more. So that becomes our benchmark. That becomes our goalpost. That sets our expectations. No matter what we do,
Yeah.
it always feels like we're falling short. Now, that may sound like
Right.
I'm a workaholic and a perfectionist. While I do identify with those traits, I really think this is how I'm wired because of my ADHD. I really don't think it's negotiable.
Our mission is get girls diagnosed at an earlier age so you don't grow up with this toll. Do you sometimes think how your life would have been different if somebody had?
It's such a good question. I spent much of my childhood wishing, fantasizing that I would have grown up in a different family.
Oh,
I'm adopted. I was adopted into a very abusive family with a narcissistic, compulsive adopting mother. I credit a lot of my resilience to having that childhood. I so many times wish, oh my gosh, I fantasized about every one of my teachers. If only she was my mom, my Girl Scout leader, random women walking down the street who had no idea why I was staring at them. I adopted myself out to all kinds of other mothers because
oh.
it just gave me a sense of hope, something to hang on to. So, is it a blessing? Is it a curse? Did it help me? Did it not?
Would it have been different if somebody had spotted it and helped you, given you the support?
During the time that when I grew up, even if ADHD had been diagnosed or screened for, as we're now advocating for with young girls, I might not have met criteria because of my high IQ,
Hmm.
because I had already learned how to mask and hide to keep myself safe at home.
Mm.
I wish maybe this would have happened differently for me, whether I would have figured it out or someone would have told me or my parents would have noticed I was struggling. Maybe I would have thought, no, that's not me. When I finally did get diagnosed, and half the people said, yeah, obviously, and the other half said, you are not. I prided myself on passing for
Leveling
normal.
through it. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I needed to be that way because I didn't have any adults who were supportive in any way. I needed to be that way to keep myself going forward. I'm really proud of how resilient I am. I'm really proud of my sense of humor and how much I've turned negative things into positive. And I've thought of this so many times. Would my life have been better if I had been diagnosed sooner? And I have to say, within the context of our culture, I don't think so. I think we are now at this point in 2025 where ADHD in girls and women is just beginning to be normalized and talked about openly. If it had happened sooner for me, it would have still happened during those years when it would have been just
Yeah.
like being adopted.
Yeah.
I never spoke about that openly for many years because I was trying to pass for a biological child. And so I think, to me, the triumph of my life is not only getting diagnosed, but it's being out in the open about all of who I am, even the parts that I have tried desperately to hide in the past.
And taking the hard stuff that happened in your life and turning it into insights for your clients. I can imagine it must feel very fulfilling for you to be doing this.
I consider it a legacy. I think we're all only here for a brief time. Here's what I tell my clients. What took me decades to figure out, it is my mission to help you get further and faster. I do get a lot of satisfaction from that, just like I do with trying to help my kids manage ADHD maybe better than I did. I just am not of this mindset that so many women our generation are, that we had to hit our heads against the glass ceiling and now it's going to be their turn. No, I'm going to hold the door open for as many of them as I possibly can, because that's the decent thing to do.
It's really great. Do you find yourself giving the same advice over and over again to your clients? Are there one or two things that you are always suggesting?
There are certain lessons that we all need to learn. Those are the things that I find myself repeating a lot. I think, especially as women, we are culturally conditioned to wait for permission and to seek approval. Unfortunately, what that means, if you have ADHD, that your entire life is going to feel like a game of Mother May I.
Huh.
What we need to do once we're diagnosed and we understand we're not slow, we're not lazy, we're not unmotivated, we're not incompetent, we need to learn how to give ourselves permission and to seek our own approval. This takes some doing. I understand this is no small feat. My psychotherapy background comes in very handy here. But when we can say, I'm going to approve of myself and I am going to proceed on my own permission slip, that changes everything.
That's great and a wonderful way to wind up. Cynthia, have I forgotten to ask anything?
We're so lucky when we get to talk to women who have been through therapy. They are able to be their actualized self and share their selves with us. I recently put that out as a poll question to ask online how many women with ADHD had therapy or wanted to have therapy. And it seems like it's a lot. That is a downfall of not getting diagnosed early, that maybe you spend years in therapy trying to correct your self-talk from those years when you didn't know about your ADHD.
I am a big fan of therapy and I've been certainly a beneficiary of it and practiced it as my profession for many years. But sadly, most women with ADHD, especially those with the inattentive distractible subtype who have the means and the access, do end up in therapy, and many of them go for long periods of time. But the likelihood that they're going to get an accurate diagnosis of ADHD or that the topic would ever even be raised is still. I was in and out of therapy for years. I was diagnosed with adjustment disorder, with CPTSD, with anxiety, with depression. It wasn't until I got my accurate diagnosis of ADHD and properly treated. I've never been on anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications again, because the ADHD was the underlying driver of those other problems. It makes me very sad to know how many women are seeking answers, seeking help, getting therapy, and still not getting their needs met. It makes me really upset.
Right.
These girls, they're all being inhibited from living their fullest, most authentic lives and making the contributions that they're uniquely qualified to make. This is really important work that we're all doing.
Shame is such a powerful thing, right? That could be the main thing holding people back, right? We're all doing our best to.
That's right. We're all in it together.
It's been great talking with you, Diann. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to meet you both and to help spread the good word.
Okay. Good luck with your practice.
We believe all girls with ADHD should get a fair start in life by getting diagnosed by age 8. Visit us at www.findtheadhdgirls.org. Thank you.